Hey, what's up, y'all? All right, man, Chris Abbott here. We've got Michael Lukaszewski from Church Fuel. Super excited about this live. Actually, the first time we've gone live on this channel, which is pretty awesome. So, hey, here's the deal, man. Before we dive into the interview, just want to let you guys know about something that we're doing here. If you are having trouble getting the word out about your church, maybe you still feel like you're the best kept secret in town, we're actually doing a live church growth workshop, excuse me, here on August 10th. If you want to register for that, you can go to churchmarketinguniversity.com/ABBO, ABBO. That is my personal invite link to you guys. So churchmarketinguniversity.com/ABBO. And we're going to walk you step by step through our kind of back to school visitor plan that we've put together. Michael's going to be there. Ryan Wakefield's going to be there. I'm going to be there. Super excited about this. So that's August 10th. You can go and register for that. And then we'll specifically show you how to use that back to school visitor plan in order to add 10 to 15 new families to your church this fall. So check that out if you guys want to. Man, Michael, thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited. Here's the deal. Michael is a genius. Okay. I'm gonna tell you guys right now.
Too much.
No, Michael's a genius. Here, so true story. Number one, he is the founder of Church Fuel, which has over 1,300 members in it and absolutely crushes it. The content is amazing. I mean, absolutely insane. And just to give you guys I'll explain that in a second here. All right, so he's the founder of Church Fuel, over 1,300 members, crushing it. He is the author of Streamline, which I'm personally reading through, our whole team. In fact, Michael, I don't even know if I told you this. I went to my buddy's church up in Wichita and literally pulled out this book and just threw it out on the table. And I was like, every single one of you guys need to read this. And the pastor went out and bought 12 copies and gave it to his entire team.
Oh, wow.
They're reading through it as a staff through a team. It is absolutely amazing. So you guys need to pick up a copy of that. And then Michael is also a former church planner. And even though he's super humble, he took his church from 0 to 1,000 in less than 2 years. Okay. So we're going to get into that here in a few minutes. But first, Michael, man, welcome. Man, appreciate you hanging out on YouTube here with me.
Dude, it's so fun. I love it. And I love all the stuff that you have on your channel with all the different, there's strategies, there's tactics, there's ideas, there's systems that you talk about. We'll talk about that today. Just a wealth of information for, if you're a pastor or church leader, just so much good stuff. So thanks for having me.
Man, thanks, bro. I'm super excited. The channels, we just celebrated our 2-year anniversary, which is pretty cool.
Awesome.
And like I said, first time we've ever gone live. You were the very first guest on live here, which is cool, man. So, okay, let me begin by just telling you guys this. Okay, when I say Michael's a genius, that's not hyperbole. Okay, literally, Michael and I, this was a couple of years ago, bro, but Michael and I were chatting and he was like, oh yeah, man, hey, if you're ever in Atlanta, man, just let me know. And we'll hang out. And I was like, oh yeah, perfect. And so I texted him the next day. I was like, bro, this is crazy. I'm going to be in Atlanta next month. Right. And I wasn't. All I did, I went in, I literally just bought it, just rented an Airbnb. And he's like, okay, cool. Hey, let's hang out. And then I just jumped in my car and drove 12 and a half hours from Tulsa to Atlanta and hung out with Michael for the day because I was, in Atlanta, and then jumped back in my car and drove home, right? I literally drove there just to hang out with him, about 25 hours in the car, totally worth it. I think we only hung out for 8 or 9 hours, but I spent 25 hours in the car. He's that brilliant. And I'm telling you, when it comes to systems, right, this is what church growth comes down to. And this is why I'm really, really excited. And this is what I want to dive into, Michael. So, Ryan and I have Church Marketing University. We're really good at helping churches get the word out, right? And attract new visitors, right? But once those people come in, you have to actually know what to do with them, right? And that's where systems, I had a friend of mine has a church, about 20 people, right? And we helped them with some prayer ads. And in 5 months, they ended up praying for over 1,900 people, had 209 new families sign up to plan a visit to their church. Right. And they tripled the church. But I remember he was telling me, he's like, man, he's an awesome guy. But he's like, man, if we'd had some more things in place, we would have retained a lot more people. He's like, with all the visitors we had, we should have, done more than just triple. Right. And I immediately thought of you because I was like, that's what it is. That's where the systems come in. So we're going to talk about kind of your what you've done as a church planner here in a few minutes. But before we get into the which like I'm excited to hear that story, right? 0 to 1,000 in less than 2 years. But what I'd like to do is I've heard you talk about some different systems. Man, can you just talk about that a little bit about what types of systems that you think churches need to have in place in order to start handling new families?
Yeah, and the word system is funny because it's like it means all these different things to all these to different people, right? So like there's a solar system, like that's the first system we probably learned when we were like in second grade. We made that stupid little thing out of the styrofoam balls or whatever. But a system is just a series of repeatable steps, right? So like I always think it's a little bit like tennis. When you hit the ball to the person on the other side, they hit it back. It's this back and forth thing. And in a church setting, it's when something happens, what happens next? And it's this back and forth, thing. So you talk, Chris, I've heard you talk about this, like guest follow-up system. You don't need to just follow up with guests. You need a guest follow-up system. And that's not semantics. Guest follow-up is like, oh, I remember I need to check in with Larry. Larry came and visited. And you're depending on your brain or your memory or somebody to remind you. But a system is every time there's a guest, this happens no matter what. Now they can still break. They need a human touch, so it's not like a robot, but you're putting a process into place. And so the best advice I ever got was anytime something happens on a regular repeated basis, right? So anything that happens more than once, there's probably an opportunity to create a system about it. So in our churches, right, there's so many things that we do every week or every month or every quarter. That's when we want to have a system. And so that thinking just really kind of freed me up to go, man, I don't have to like force all this or remember all this or just count on people showing up to do it. You can actually have a system where it's probably going to happen.
Bro. Okay. That's so good. So, man, I've heard you talk about before. I've actually got a bunch of notes from the last time I heard you speak, which was phenomenal when you talked about like the 7 systems that every church needs.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the things that you said was when you don't have healthy systems, you have to solve the same problems over and over again. Right.
Yeah.
So can you just talk a little bit about that, kind of explain what you mean?
Yeah, it's like there's problems in church. Church is full of problems, right? Because we're all problem people. And so what you don't want to have to do is every time that there is a problem to just kind of like, oh, let's diagnose this. Let's figure out a solution. Oh, we got to call this meeting together. We got to have these people. And then the next week, it's just a slight variation of the same problem and so that's very tiring to constantly solve the same problem. I was actually last night, I went to the whole rest of my family was doing stuff. So it was just my son and I at home. He's 16. And so we went to dinner to get burgers somewhere or whatever. And we were literally talking about money, right? Because he was like, we were talking about money. And we were talking about how every time he gets a paycheck, right, what should happen? And we do the whole, give, save, spend situation or whatever. And I'm like, what you want to do, that's a money management system. You don't want to have to think, oh, I want to be generous today. Okay, let me do it. Oh, I should save money because you want to try to automate that. That's a system. And so anytime you don't want to just like realize one day that you don't have any savings. That's problem to problem to problem. A system solve those things, or it at least helps solve those things,
Dude, that's so good, man. So good. I love that because and you hit on this a little bit at the beginning, right? But the word systems, I think to anyone who's really good at systems or is implemented systems in their church or their business or organization understands the importance of them. But when you haven't really put a lot of systems in place, it's kind of like this like weird, like kind of ambiguous, like, okay, like what are systems, right? So
yeah,
I think you explained that really, really well.
Well, and Chris, you also think too, when you hear that word system, a lot of times people think these really complex mind map, mind blowing, if then A, B, like it's an electrician's schematic or whatever. A system could have one step. It could have 2 steps. It doesn't have to be complicated. I know a lot of pastors, preaching is one of the 7 systems that we talked about. I know a lot of pastors, their system for sermon prep is literally they have to block time off on their calendar to do sermon prep, because if they don't
I think we lost you for a sec, Mike.
That's all right. Yeah. We were talking about sermon prep and a system, for preparing a sermon. It may be as simple as like, hey, on Monday morning, I'm blocking 3 hours. On Thursday by 5, I'm going to be done, and I'm going to email. So it's like, it's a preparation system. It doesn't have to be complicated with all these steps, like a schematic or something. It's not like blueprints to, some bridge. It's just simple steps of like, hey, I do this every week. So I got to get some kind of rhythm for my own personal benefit.
That's good, man. That's really good. So I remember one of the very first systems that I personally implemented at my church. We already had some systems going, but when I'd come on staff and started, one of the very first things that I did was, and we were a mega church, but we didn't have a follow-up system. Right. And so like, I literally, I went through, and I think I actually saw a webinar from Tyler Smith. This is like 6 or 7 years ago. Right. At Texan Church. And so like, I signed up for Texan Church and like, I built out like a follow-up system. I think at first I did like a 6-week follow-up system, eventually built out a 12-week follow-up system. And I just remember I was like, oh my gosh, this is why everybody talks about systems, because literally, if we had 25 visitors on a Sunday, who knows if they're ever going to come back, right? Hopefully they had a good time. But it was like all of a sudden, it was like on Monday, all we had to do was just like, and I think we even had like some interns that did. They just like entered in all the info from the contact cards and plugged them in. Right. And then literally for 12 weeks, they got 12 weeks of follow-up messages with people. In fact, I remember, so Katie, who's over our guest services, I remember one of the things, she and I were talking on a Sunday one time, and this girl comes right up, she's like, oh my gosh, Katie, and like throws her arm around him like they were like, long lost college friends, and was like, oh, thank you so much. Like, man, I came like a month ago. You've been reaching out to me. You've been texting me, inviting me back. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Like, I was out of town and then I had this happen and blah, blah, blah. But thank you. Like, you didn't forget about me. I'm here. Thank you so much. Yeah. Right. And then she ran in the service. And I look at Katie, I was like, who is that? She was like, I have no idea. Right. Like, she's like, that's literally just our follow-up system that has
the system remembered.
Yeah. The system remembered. Yeah. That's a great way of saying it. I love it, man.
Yeah. No, I love that, because see, like, Chris, that's a great story, because when you put a system in place, even if it's not a complicated one, your brain and remembering to follow up can't scale. Like, our memory cannot scale, but a system can scale. If we do this, when this happens, whether that's one person, 10 people, like you were talking about a workshop that's happening and you're going to walk through the fall system to get 10 to 15 new families, right? You should already think about right now, how am I going to follow up with 10 to 15 new families? Because they're going to happen. That's going to happen this fall. What's our system to follow up with those people when they come? And if it's 50 people, if it's 50 families, your system will be able to do that. You're not going to have to remember.
Dude. Okay. I love that. I've read a statistic that says, and I don't know if this was like pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, but that the average Christian in the United States goes to church 1.2 times. Right. Okay. So one of the reasons I get excited about follow-up systems is literally just for that reason, right? It's like, and that girl's was the perfect thing. Like, she came to church because she wanted to come to church, was looking for a new church, but then just life happened and she missed a month. But, and who knows if she would have ever come back if she hadn't just kept getting text messages and emails, right? Follow-ups from Katie. So, okay. So we talked about follow-up systems. You mentioned a preaching system. Right. Mm-hmm. And there's 7. What are some of the other systems?
So volunteers is a huge one. Volunteers is a big system, right? And so one of the ways that we teach that in church field is we try to break it down into 3 pieces, right? So when you look at your church and volunteers, like, you're never not going to need volunteers, right? It's constant, always a need. So anytime there's always a need, that's where you need a system. So we break it down in 3 steps: recruit, train, and pastor. All right. So what's your system to recruit? If you don't have a system, constantly, like, right, I remember being a pastor and somebody would come up and hand me a little note or whatever. It's like, can you announce this? Can you announce that? Or the offering would be bad. It's like, you need to preach on money because the offering was bad, right? You're constantly responding to the latest problem or crisis. Yeah. A good system will smooth that out, right? That's what systems do. They smooth things out. It doesn't eliminate the need, but it smooths it out. So you need a system to recruit. You're always going to need volunteers. So when do you preach on volunteerism? How are you training your people to find their friends and get their people involved? Like, that's a system. You can almost sit down and think, okay, in an ideal world, how will we do that? That's where you start with that. And then you need to train them. You can't just throw them into a thing and go, oh, I hope they stay. You got to train. And then you need to pastor them. That's the one that most of us miss, because, we burn through volunteers because we give them too much stuff to do, and we're not actually pastoring them and caring for them. And so they quit, and then it just creates the need over and over and over again. So all of those things, right? You have to be involved in that. There's work to do in it, but you need the framework to be able to do those things. And that's the system. We go to a church here in Atlanta where I know twice a year, 2 times a year, they do like a big, I mean, it's almost like most of us watching this are like church insiders, right? So we know how the sausage is made or whatever. You know, the person sitting there is like just participating, but you know what's going into it because you're running it leading up to that. But I know, right? So I know when they go, oh, this is strategic service Sunday, I know exactly what's going to happen because they do it like clockwork, and they do it at the right time of year because they recruit a bunch of people, then they get them all excited, and then they go serve. And it's just a rhythm. And so volunteer system is a huge one.
Oh, that's huge. Okay. Volunteer system, preaching system, follow-up system. Talk to me about a leadership system.
Leadership system, another huge one, because every pastor that we talk to, you probably hear this too, Chris. It's like we have this, low level guilt that we're not developing our leaders enough, right? So if I to just go to any pastor and say, hey, do you have enough leaders? The answer is probably no. But do you have some leaders? The answer is probably yes, right? There are some leaders in your church, official, unofficial, somewhere in between. And if you were to say, are you pouring into them enough? We'd probably say no. Like we know we should do more of that, but there's always these other problems to solve. So that is a system problem and not a passion problem. It's not that you don't want to do that. It's not that you're like, I don't really care that these people grow in their leadership. No, you care greatly. You just bump up against the realities of ministry. So where that gap exists, a system can help solve that. So we have a leadership system inside Church Fuel. We actually call it Leader Pulse. And we say, all right, for that system needs 2 things. It needs a calendar and it needs content, right? So when are you going to do certain things? And you got to schedule those, and you got to keep other things away from them. And then when you do have the thing scheduled, what is it? Like, what do you talk about? What do you what's the stuff? So you need the content. And so together that creates a leadership development system. Now, it doesn't guarantee more leaders, but it certainly helps create a culture where leadership can rise to the surface. So that's like the quick 2-minute version of a leadership system. Bro, every church would benefit from that. Like that one helps all the other ones,
100%. 100%. Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest things. I think you're right. I think, I can't remember the last time I talked to a church who felt like they were doing a really good job developing leaders. Right. Yeah, I'm sure there's some out there, but most churches, when I talk to them, like, man, just don't feel like they're doing a great job on that front.
And the big reason is like, I know I should get to that. I just can't seem to make the time. It's like I can't seem to make the time for that. And so, there's good news, bad news in that. You're not ever going to make the time. You can't. First of all, none of us can make time. Like there's no ability that we have to make time. So again, a system helps with a lot of that, particularly on the feeling side of things.
Dude, I love that. And I think like if you're too busy right now to do something like that, I think that's actually the perfect time to launch a leadership system, right? Because if you can figure out how to do it right now when you're super busy and you've got a million balls in the air, then you're really going to be able to absolutely crush it once things kind of slow down and you've already got that leadership system rolling.
Yeah. Like this is going to sound like the stupidest advice you've ever heard, but like literally step 1 of that system is let some of those balls drop. Like you can't do all that. You cannot continually let those things keep going. Like it is not sustainable. And so the reason in a lot of churches that there's not more of a culture of leadership development is because there's the rush in and save the day complex that we just take it all on ourselves and we just do it. So we're maintaining it and we're busy and tired and exhausted, but we're giving off the vibe that like all this is happening. And so again, that's complex. I mean, there's a complexity involved in this, but organizing some of these things on paper, in an ideal world and going, okay, this is where we're going to start. We're going to start with this, and then give yourself some grace to let it figure out.
Bro, okay, I love it. So let me ask you this. We're gonna get to the other the other 3 systems here, but I'm curious. Like, so if there's a church out there, right? Let's say a smaller church somewhere under 200, they haven't broken through the 200 barrier yet. And they're just like, dude, Michael, like I have no systems right now. Like things are just kind of crazy. Like I'm doing everything. I'm super busy. Is there a system that you would tell people to start with as like the very first one to work on?
Yeah, really good question. We actually have an assessment. I should find that link and maybe we'll put it in the notes.
Yeah.
But we have a little assessment that you could take that would kind of say, hey, where should I start? Because the tendency is go, hey, when we talk about those 7 systems and I ask the question, which one of these needs the most help in your church? Guess what the most common answer is? It's all of them. We need help on all of them. And so I totally get that. And really the one to focus on is the one that you feel like is going to lead to the greatest impact. So in most churches, right, it's not the same for all churches, because some churches are really struggling financially and you need to go right to the finance system. Some churches are struggling with volunteers, you need to go to the volunteer system. So with all things being equal, which I know they're not, but if all things were being equal, I'd probably start with that leadership or the connecting people system, because those, those are ones that really have such a long-term, both growth and health benefits, and really help set your church up for success. Now, because you started out talking about this too. You want to get a lot of guests to come to your church, but you want to make sure that like it's good when they get there and that there's a path for them. And so you just don't want them to come one time and be like, not for me. And, they're out. And so, some of those feel like a little more like backdoor type systems.
Yeah.
And I think you need to complement those with, you have the front door systems, guests, visitor, all those things, web, digital, all that stuff. You want to make sure that you have some good backdoor systems to kind of keep people connected.
Bro, love that, man. And I'll say this. So one of the reasons I've always loved Church Fuel, right? Because like you walk people through how to set up all these systems and that kind of stuff. And I've always felt like, I think we even talked about this like years ago when we first met. But I've always felt like Church Fuel is kind of like the flip side of like the church growth coin. Like I said, like we've always been really good, especially at CMU, been really good at like helping people get the word out, right? And do marketing stuff and get people in, right? But once you get there, it's not just a follow-up system, right? Yeah. Like, or it's not just like you need all these different systems to get people in place in order to scale, especially if you want to scale, past the 200 barrier, which we're going to be talking about here in just a few minutes. But so, like what you guys have done, like, I feel like it's like, okay, you can help get them in the door, right? Now you need systems in order to be able to make scale and get people to stick, get them to come back, right? Get them into maybe a volunteer group or a small group or, get them into the leadership pipeline, right? Like, so that's why I think systems are so important. And I think most churches that are stuck just haven't figured out those kind of systems to get through it. I'm curious. Have you ever read the book Predictable Success?
Yeah, I love that book. Les McCune, I think is how you say his name, where he talks about the like the treadmill and then the predictable success is where you want to be, and then like then it goes downhill. It's like the life cycle, hump thing. Love that book.
Yeah. I was thinking about you because I read that book last summer, and then I was explaining it to a friend here like this weekend, and as we were going through, and I started thinking, because the whole idea is like the 7 stages, like 7, like the life cycle of any like church, organization, business, anything. And like, the first part is like early struggle, right? So like in the church world, this would be like if you are planning a church, it's just that early struggle. Like you're trying to just get the word out, get people to your interest parties, right? Get people to your launch, and then actually keep them and stick around. But eventually, if that starts to happen, you start getting like new families flowing in. You get out of the early struggle stage and into stage 2, which is like your they call it the fun stage, right? This is where just everything you do works, right? Like you throw a tailgate party and 200 people show up, and you have a back to school bash, right? And 300 people show up, and it's just like, and there's just new guests every single Sunday, and people are inviting their friends, and life changes happen. People get saved, baptized, plugged into small groups. Like it's awesome. Right. But then what happens is if you continue to grow through that, you hit whitewater. And I think probably every pastor who's been in ministry for more than 5 minutes could probably understand exactly what whitewater is, right? It's exactly what it sounds like. We're just, everything's rocky and crazy and you can't figure it out. It just feels like, oh my gosh, this guy just fell out of the boat and you're trying to pull him back in, right? And like, it's a little bit crazy. And Les McCune, right? Like his whole point is that in order to get out of whitewater and then into like the top of the bell curve, right, which is like predictable success, it takes systems, right? It's like systems are the only thing that gets you out of whitewater into predictable success. right? Where you're just healthy and everything's rolling and you have systems and you have the people in place and the leadership in place and all that kind of stuff, right? And then just for anyone who's nerdy like me wants to know the rest of it, right? After that, you go into like, if you're in predictable success for a while and you focus too much on systems and not enough on continuing to invite people and, having visitor systems, this kind of stuff, then you go into treadmill, where you're still seeing a little bit of success, but you're kind of on a downward slope. And then you slide into, if you don't do anything about it, you slide into the big rut. And then from the big rut, you slide into the death rattle, right before you close your doors in a church, any organization. So, but I was thinking about you because I was like, oh my gosh, in the church world, literally like that whitewater is like basically like churches need church fuel because they need like the systems to get out of whitewater and into predictable success. I'm curious, just in your ministry experience, do you think there's a growth barrier that happens somewhere in that? Like, is there a numerical barrier where whitewater happens, or is it different for every church?
That's a really good question. I'd actually love to see some data or analysis on that. I mean, I'm sure you could probably correlate some of those phases to sizes. I don't know what those numbers would be, but definitely, the whitewater metaphor, again, I had the same thing you thought when I read that. I'm like, that's almost every pastor I know, because you're constantly running around, doing all these things. And I think he's exactly right in that book where you say the only thing to get out of that is systems. And, because we're in church and ministry, a lot of times we try to get out of those things with more preaching or more vision. And we just throw more vision at a problem and we think that's going to solve it. And it doesn't solve. Like if it's a system problem, it cannot be solved with better preaching or more vision. You have to solve it with creating a system. And so again, this doesn't have to be overcomplicated. I think there's people like me that make this overly complicated. And so, I'm saying you can create the simple V1 of this is when you find yourself in that whitewater phase and you want to get out of it with a system, instead of just going, how do I solve this problem? Step back and go, how am I going to solve this problem every time it happens? Because it's going to happen again and again. And you literally go, okay, step one. It's the same thing with your guest follow-up. It's like, okay, when a guest comes, not what are we going to do with Bob because Bob visited, but literally what are we going to do every time a guest visits for the first time? Okay, step one, we're going to send them a text. Step two, or whatever, whatever it may be. Like you design it and you go, I'm designing this for every time it happens. And then you go apply that to Bob. Then you go apply that to whatever the wave of crashing against the boat is. So now you've got a system solution to a problem, and you can refine it, you can tweak it, you can make it. But this is not the old set it and forget it, whatever that cooking device was. Set it and forget it. I forgot what that thing was, like a microwave or something. Set it and forget it, a TV infomercial. This is, you put the system in place and then you look at it. You see if it's working. You see who's coming, how's it happening? And you can keep tweaking it. You can keep making it better. But now you're not recreating it every time it happens. You're actually improving it. And I think that's so much better.
Bro. Okay. So if y'all are taking notes, or if you're not, you need to write this down. You said you need to ask yourself a question. Whenever a problem arises, you need to ask yourself the question, not how do I solve this, but how do I solve this every time it happens?
Yeah.
Is that right, bro?
That's right. Yeah.
Man,
and those are like, I guess there's a pre-question to that is like, is this going to happen more than once? If it's a one-time thing, you don't need to create system, solve the problem. Like, you don't have to overcomplicate it, but there are certain things in your church that happen many, 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 many times a week, a month, a year. Like start with those, right? Start with those things and, get those in place. And then you can go to the things that happen a little less infrequently and work that way.
Bro, I love that. Okay. Man, I'm gonna write that down myself. That is that's awesome, because obviously we're not just talking about church, we're talking about any organization. But I love that. Not just how do we solve this right now, but how do we solve this every time it happens. Okay, so far out of the 7 systems that you talk about, we've talked about a leadership system, follow-up system, preaching system, a volunteer system. Talk to me about a visitor system.
Yeah, visitor system is huge, right? And that's where, like, Chris, I think you've got a ton of information on this. And I think you and Ryan and the team at CMU are just so knowledgeable and have such good stuff on this. Your church needs a steady stream of new people coming to visit your church, right? I think, we were talking about that predictable success thing or whatever, right?
Yeah.
The treadmill and the downslope of that, usually what's happening there is there's not new people, right? They're like new people is the way to get back to, kind of predictable success. And so if you look around your church and go, I know all these people, I mean, there's something good about that, but then there's something that's like, hey, maybe there's something to look at there, right? That's not where we want to stay. And so you definitely need a visitor system by which you have a way to, I'll use the term attract. I know that word's like a loaded word, but like a way to like attract visitors so that new people are coming to your church, and then to be able to follow up with them and connect them into the life of your church as well. So that's a huge one. And I would say if your church is like kind of on the downward slope of that, then that may be the system to look at first. It's like,
wow,
okay. we need to look at guests. We need to go like, if there's good stuff happening and there's not people there to participate in it, it's like you almost have, this is such a rudimentary example, but like if the restaurant has good food, then getting the word out is the problem. We got good food, we got good staff, we got good ambiance. It's like, how do we get the word out? People should come eat here because the food is good. And I think that's a great place for churches to focus on this fall, even, It's like, work on that now.
Bro, man, yes, I 100% agree with you, right? That steady stream of new visitors. And I love how you said it, right? Like if you look out into the crowd and you're like, I recognize all these people, right? That means you're not having enough visitors. Yeah, you need some new people. Okay, love that. I think too, there's a lot of churches, I think depending on the life cycle of your church, right? Like my guess is that most churches probably fall somewhere into either the treadmill, right? Like they're on the upward slope, but they've kind of scaled to a point where now they just don't have the systems to get into predictable success. So they're probably in whitewater right there, or they're probably like maybe at some point the church was thriving, but they've kind of slipped into treadmill, right? And they're just not getting as many new people. And I love how you said that. So to simplify everything, right? Basically saying, if the problem is whitewater right now, and that's where your church is, you need systems to get you into predictable success. If you've slipped into treadmill, you need new people to get you back into predictable success. So that's probably just a really simple way. I love how you said that, man. So that's huge. Okay. So, all right, talk to me about a giving system and kind of what that would look like at a church who's kind of implementing that for the first time.
Yep. Again, another thing, it's like your church is always going to need money or an offering or, however that's happening in your church. It's something that is not like, you can't just dial it up with a good sermon, when times get tough. You can't just, have a little mini campaign or special offering to like get out of a rut when you did. Like you want to have consistent stuff there. Plus, I think giving and discipleship are very closely tied together. So, So that's a huge thing that we could spend a lot of time and unpack. But again, the system for how do you talk about money in your church? You don't have to go by feeling on that. You can actually plan some of that out. If you have an offering every week, you can't just start like it just doesn't happen. Like you should talk about it. You should celebrate. You need to appreciate and thank people. If you're not like trying to remember that, then that's you're not going to do it. You're going to come across as ungrateful. So a system will actually help you be grateful because you'll know how to do it with communication around it. Things happen based on a calendar around that. So a lot of this stuff can be planned out in advance, and then you can just kind of run the plays. I think about like Chris, when we're doing this live and people may be watching this later or whatever, but like it's about to be football season, right? And so football is about to start, and all these teams, high school, college, professional, whatever. I'll use professional as the example. They have the summer and they have training camp where they learn the plays and they practice the plays. And then there's only a few games. Like there's really relatively only a few games where they go out and they execute the plays and see if they can win. These are the best professional athletes in their sport. They don't just show up on Sunday and go, okay, what are we going to do? Like they literally have a playbook. They literally have the specific plays for the specific circumstances. And these are professionals. Like if anybody was going to make stuff up, they could make it up because they're qualified, but they literally run the plays. They do what they have practice. And so a giving system is a little bit like that. I know I'm like unspiritualizing this And that's not always fair because there's a huge spiritual component that you cannot plan for.
No, that's good.
But the part that we can plan for, I think we should plan for, It's like the parts that we can't, like, I can't explain that part, but this part we can plan for. Like I can plan to communicate so I don't have to remember that and run those plays. So, right. You design good plays and then you run the plays.
Bro. Okay. So here, man, I love what you said. And I love the analogy of football. I'm a huge football fan. So one of the things that for me, this was in 2017, I was on staff at my church, and I remember my pastor sent an email out to the entire staff, no context. Literally all it said was, and this is a quote from Urban Meyer, right? Who's won 2 or 3 national championships. And all it said was, average leaders have a quote. Good leaders have a plan. Great leaders have a system. Right. Like, and that was the whole email, right? No context, but it hit me hard because I literally just thought, okay, wait a second, especially like, I grew up playing football, right? So understand what that means, right? It's not just a motivational quote. It's not just a game plan, but you have a system, right? And you stick to the system, and all of your decision-making goes through the framework of that system. And I just remember thinking, what's my system? So at the time I was over like our marketing and media. I was the marketing and media director on staff. And I just remember thinking like, okay, well, what's my system for bringing in new people? And I realized I was like, I have one. It's just in my head, right? And I realized like I hadn't ever communicated it, had never told anybody about it. And so I literally like with these giant whiteboard tables, which are the coolest things ever. Like you could literally write on the tables, which for a guy like me is amazing, right? Because I'm just like, yeah, I'd love to write. If everything could be a whiteboard, that's perfect. And so I remember just like writing out like this whole thing, and it was like down across it was like 20 feet long because I could just write on these like tables and put them all together. And then I looked at it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the system, right? And it was like this like 9-part visitor system of like, here's how we're going to go, and then here's how we follow up with them, and it was the first time that for me it all kind of made sense. I realized I had it in my head, but once I actually put it out there and then like took pictures of it, then I was able to like show it to my team, show it to my pastor, and be like, oh guys, hey, this is the system right here. This is how we get new people in the front door. And
it's good,
right? That was kind of huge. So love your analogy. I'd actually forgotten about that too. You just told that story, but I love that. That's a great love that analogy to football season. Just out of curiosity, you're from Atlanta. Are you a Falcons fan?
There are no Falcons fans.
Okay, bro.
I mean, fan is a strong word to use in Atlanta when talking about the Falcons.
So I will say the Kyle Pitts pickup was huge. I think he's going to be good for you guys for a really long time.
Yeah, I'm not sure we like that in Atlanta, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Well,
I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, like, I think maybe we just have a city of complainers. So no matter who was drafted, it'd be like, we should have got this other guy,
I could see that. I mean, highest drafted tight end of all time, but I think he might be worth it. So
I mean, I'm rooting for him. We're rooting for him now. I mean, he's one of us, for better or worse.
Okay, so we need a system, and I love the illusion of football. So we've just to recap, in case anyone's taking notes or paying attention, we've talked about the 7 systems that every church needs. We talked about a volunteer system, and there were 3 parts to that, right? Recruit, train, and pastor. Is that right?
Yep. Okay. That's right.
So we talked about a volunteer system. We talked about a preaching system. We talked about follow-up systems, leadership system, a visitor system, a giving system, which also has 2 parts, a system to manage and a system to raise the money, right? And then, so talk to me about the last system here, the connection system.
Yeah, I mean, getting people connected into the life of the church is huge, right? That's, some people call this a discipleship system. There's lots of different components of this, but like when somebody, so right, follow up and connection are related, right? You follow up with people to get them connected, probably. But what does that connection look like? What are you connecting them into, right? Is it to volunteer? Is it to be in a group? Is it to be in a class? Is it connect? How do you define what connected is, right? That's a huge piece. Like, we can't get people connected.
Wow, okay.
How do you define connected? I don't know. Well, then that's why we can't do it. So like literally defining what % of your congregation right now is connected. Like, that's a number you can know. You'll have to define what connected means. Then you'll have to measure it. You'll have to figure it out. And then you go, okay, well, we got 60% of our congregation is connected. The other 40% is not. And then how you communicate with those people is now different, right? So you go back to the football analogy. How the coach talks to the players is different than how they talk to the public. And so how you talk to your congregation, the connected people, I get emails from my church that are clearly meant for insiders, right? Like clearly meant for people that are like volunteering and giving. In fact, they'll say it a lot of times. They're like, hey, I'm sending this email to the people who blah, blah, blah. You're one of those people. Here's some information. That's not going to the general public. General public's getting different stuff that's relevant. And so again, all of that is you can think through, okay, who, what, when, where. You can just kind of go through those basic questions, write that down and go, okay, this is how we do this. It doesn't mean that's how you're going to do it forever. It's like, this is how we're going to do this. And it just makes things easier. You know, when we think about systems, Chris, maybe this is a good place to like, just because there's more than 7. I mean, there's others that we didn't even talk about, but like, these are just the 7 I feel like we know something about and I could talk about today, but there's lots of other, there's lots of other things too. But when we talk about creating these systems or whatever, you're like, well, where is God? Like God can do anything he wants. And my answer to that is absolutely. Like I can show you churches that are completely disorganized from, A to Z. And it's like something's going on there because this is a spiritual endeavor and you can't always explain that. The systems that we create are not for God's benefit. It's not like God is going, I'm going to bless that church because they got a really good volunteer system. I really like how they just do blah, blah, blah. No. God can do whatever he wants. The systems are not for God's benefits. The system is for our benefit because we are human and people are human. We forget, the system is for us. The system is for the people. We're not limiting, we're not limiting God by saying, here's how this is run. If anything, as you're creating this stuff, you should be very open to new ideas. You should be very open to, the Spirit moving. You should be very open to changing, your systems based on lots of different things. But just recognize that those systems are for people's benefit, not for God's benefit. He doesn't need that. He doesn't need our system. He's not like, man, if these churches only get organized, I would. No, that's not what it's about. It's for us,
bro. Okay, that's so good. Systems aren't for God. Systems are for us, and and we're human and fallible. And I love, I love that idea because. Again, and I feel like I just keep saying this over and over again, but man, just in order to scale, systems are you have to have them, right? You can never scale past whatever that whitewater stage is for you without systems. And I think these 7 systems are a great place to start.
And you could literally anybody watching this can sit down and go, okay, we need to think through our XYZ system. Just pick one. So take a blank piece of paper and put number 1 at the top and just start thinking through, in a perfect world, what would happen. That's the beginning of how you create this stuff. It's not like you need artificial intelligence and 75 people in a meeting and, the district superintendent to come and have it's like, no, just sit down, get quiet, pray about it and go, okay, when this happens, that's the name of the system. And then just start thinking through what are all the things that should happen. And then you can start to automate and set it up. Okay, well, in order to send people a text, we need to get their phone number. Okay, so now we need to, so like you start to think through what needs to be done and you design the system first and then you execute it next. Dude, and just do it for one thing. Just one thing. Just one. Like you're going to feel a lot better when you have one done,
Bro, and I love what you said earlier about how systems don't have to be like super complicated, right? Like this crazy like blueprint schematic. It could be like 1 or 2 things like, oh, here's what happens, right? Whenever this happens, here's what we do.
Yeah. And you see this happen in all walks of life, right? In all walks of life. Like I've talked to people that, they want to start eating healthy or something, healthy habits or whatever. I don't eat healthy at all, but like there's people I always admire people that do that. And, they're like, how'd you start doing that? Or how'd you start exercising? And like, when you boil it down to like, there's not like a hidden secret or whatever, but they found something that works. Like I know people that be like, I wake up and I drink 16 ounces of water or whatever, or I wake up and it's like they do a thing. They just do one little thing and that leads to another little thing and leads to another little thing. And then it's like the steps take over, right? The steps. And then all of a sudden it's like a small thing became a big thing.
Yeah, dude. Okay. Love that. Man, so you mentioned eating healthy. I will say, as a complete side note, the best barbecue sandwich I've ever had in my life, I had with you when I came to Atlanta that day.
Yeah, did you got that like pastrami barbecue? It was like a everything barbecue sandwich, right?
Yeah. It was like a Texas. It was a Texas barbecue Reuben. Right?
Okay.
Which,
yeah.
Just because I remember being like, I don't really like Reubens, but I love Texas barbecue, and this sounds like a cool twist. It was, I don't know if I told you this, it was so good. Like we went there, I think we went there for lunch that day. It was so good that like literally like I door dashed it again that night before I left.
That's awesome.
Like, I was just like, what was the name of that place? That's awesome. Okay. So, all right. So let's like, I've been actually wanting to ask you about this. I've heard that when you were a church planner, and I know this was like years ago, but your church went from like 0 to 1,000 in like 2 years. Okay. So tell me a little bit about that. And then I'm sure I'm going to have a couple questions along the way, but just tell me a little bit about what that journey was like and kind of how that happened.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, there's many ways to answer that question. I mean, like if the most honest answer is, and I feel like anytime anybody should answer that question is the answer is like, really, I have no idea. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know. I do, retrospection or retrospectively, look back and you go, okay, what was going on? What was the culture? What was the environment? What are all these things? You try to figure some things out. And so, there's a unique calling. There's a unique place. You have all these like ingredients that get put together. And I think sometimes those are not reproducible. And then you try to look at things and go, okay, but what can we learn or whatever? And so I was thinking about that because I knew you were going to ask me that question. And, so we started a church. It was a portable church. We were meeting in a movie theater. And so it was like the only movie theater in this small town. So that was some distinctive, right? So that's not always reproducible because I can't say, hey, the secret is, just meet in the only movie theater in town. Like that's the secret. But that leads to it, right? Because it makes like getting the word out a lot easier, and it's some of those things. But I would say I think the principle that I could pull out of that is that you can lead with your distinctives, right? So when you're looking at your church right now, you go, okay, what is it that God has given us, or what is it that makes us unique? And you can lean into that. A lot of times we just are those things, and we don't lean into those things. And so I think leaning into some of those distinctives, we're the church that prays for people is a distinctive, right? And so it's like, could you be known as the church? So you find those things that whether they're called, whether you're called or the community or like all these different things that are happening together, and you try to figure out what is distinct here. And I think that's something that everybody can do. Like, I think everybody can do that. You could get your leaders together. You can, in fact, when I go to church, just sometimes one of the things I ask them to come up with, we have a resource in Churchfield called the 2-page plan. And one of the boxes on that plan, it's a place to write down your purpose and your mission and your values and all that stuff. But one of my favorite boxes on there is distinctives. What makes you, right? And it's not the same as every church, right? Like if you walk into, Walmart and Target, they both sell the same stuff, but they have distinctive.
Yep.
And they lean into their, like from their commercials to the way that the stores are laid out to the lights. Like literally they lean into their distinctives, not away from them. And I think that's something churches haven't figured out, is that I was working with this big Presbyterian, or not big, but they had a big steeple. Like it was a Presbyterian church that literally had a big steeple. And I was asking all their leaders, I'm like, what are your distinctives? And almost all of them wrote, we have a steeple. And everybody in our town knows that we're the church with the steeple. So I'm like, well, why isn't that your logo? Why isn't that your website? Why isn't that on your signs? Why isn't like that? That's a for real distinctive. Like that's something 100%. That you can, it's not like it's not everything, but it's like, it's your distinctive. So I think there's a lesson in there when you look back and you say, okay, how did this happen? Or how did that happen? I love to read business books. I know you do too. I always, read the books of like how these companies get started, and how do you do that same exact thing? You can't, because you're not that person. You're not in that city. You're not like that. You can't copy that story, but there are always a few things in there that go, okay, that makes sense. Cause that's a principle, and that principle does work in our settings. And so I think we find those things.
Bro, I love that. So I think one of the things that you just hit on, right? Like your thing about finding the distinctives is huge. I remember I was working with a church here a couple of years ago, and the pastor like just kept saying, because we're putting together some Facebook ads, some plan your business stuff, and he just kept, and I was like, hey, what are some of the things that make your church unique? Right. So like I've never thought about calling it distinctives, but the way I've always communicated is like, hey, what are some of the things that like nobody else in the church, could say, right? Like nobody else in the city could say about their church that's unique to you. And I remember, I remember my friend was like, man, like we preach the unadulterated word of God. And I was like, great. So does everybody else. Right. He was like, no, but like some people water it down, but we preach. And I was like, yeah, but everybody thinks that. And so everybody could say that. Right. I was like, what's the difference? He's like, well, we have great worship. And I was like, yeah, so does everybody else. Right. He's like, no, like legit. Like these people are like recording artists. I was like, I don't care. Everybody has good worship. Right. Like what's something that makes you different? And I remember the bottom line was he was planning the church. So they hadn't actually planned yet. And like one of the things we came up with is like, what if to just distinct it, right? Because he's like, man, we're all about serving the city. And I was like, okay, prove it, right? Like how? And so the idea that we came up with was, he's like, what if we shut down the church, right? Once a month, or excuse me, not once a month, on every time there was a fifth Sunday, right? It's a couple times a year. We shut down the church. And instead of meeting as a church, right, we go out into the city and we be the church. And so they would literally like not have church, right? And so they would all talk about, hey, like fifth Sunday, this is what we do. We're all about serving the city. And we believe it so much that we stop meeting as a church every time there's a fifth Sunday. And they would serve at like homeless shelters and Habitat for Humanity and all that kind of stuff. And that became like their unique distinction that they led with in a lot of their, getting the word out, all that kind of stuff. So
I love that. I love that. Like, and there's probably a church, whether it's your church that you're a part of, or there's a church in your town that you know of. It's like, oh, you're the church that blank, whatever that blank is, that's the distinctive, right? Oh, you're the ones that always do the, whatever. And so those are things that you can really build on. And Chris, I know you talk a lot about like inviting and visitor system. And I know we're going to get into some of that stuff in other videos and different places, but like when you have those distinctives, those are almost like the things that you can market, the things that you can invite to, the things that you can kind of build around. And that's how all that stuff begins to work together.
Yeah. So I'm okay. I'm curious. So you guys had a distinctive, right? You're the church that met in the only movie theater, right? Hey, we're the church that meets in the movie theater. Were there some different growth barriers that you hit along the way, right? That you had to kind of break through?
Yeah, for sure. We definitely ran into the systems barrier, and it was that same, like you recommended that book, The Predictable Success. And I would highly recommend that, because we actually followed that trajectory, right? When you start, rushing around trying to do things. And we were really good at like attracting people to come to church and getting people to show up, but really bad on the connection side. Like we were good at the front door, bad at the back door kind of things, to just oversimplify. And so again, one of the things that smoothed that out was systems, like the literal boring stuff that we've been talking about. How do we do this? How do we do that? Let's write that down. Like, again, nothing like shocking, nothing groundbreaking, but it's go back to the football example. Most football plays are like 4-yard runs, like literally they hand the ball to somebody, he runs for like 4 yards. Like that's a lot of plays results in the average. None of those plays get on SportsCenter, right? Those plays that get on SportsCenter are the Hail Marys, the 90-yard touchdown passes or whatever, but those are very rare. Those are very rare. The everyday thing that you do every day, and systems help with that. So like every Sunday you're going to have guests in your church. Like, is the message, is the music, are the guest services, are the kids ministry, are those things really ready for those things? And that sounds really boring to talk about, but like those are the things that we should be spending our time on. The things I used to say like this, the things that happen in your church every week over time, right? Like when you if you put it all on a graph, the things that happen every week will impact more people than the big things that you do 3 or 4 times a year, because there's the volume, right? They're just happening every week. And so, if we worked on the 4-yard carries as much as we worked on the fall festival, right? Because this 4-yard carries are happening 52 times a year, like those things, they make a huge difference, that everyday stuff. And so it's super boring, just like systems are super boring. And there's like a handful of people that are like, that's not for me. That's okay. You find somebody that this is for. There's some boring person in your church that loves this stuff. It doesn't have to be you. You don't have to do it to value it. Right.
So
and I think that's
bro.
a huge thing, because a lot of pastors are not system people. They're like, I want to preach, I want to lead, I want to cast vision. That's great. Don't devalue something you're not good at. You value it and find some other people to help you do those things, because they're very important to getting out of that white water and up into the predictable success stuff.
Bro, okay, that's so huge. And I love that idea, right? Like I seriously, when I first started learning about systems, I was nerding out on this stuff, and I just kind of took it upon myself to go start learning some of this stuff, knowing that I knew nothing about it diving in. I wish I'd had someone like you to kind of help me through the process, or a book that could kind of help me through some of that stuff. So now I'm curious. I've talked to several of the church field coaches who are like all either currently pastors or have been pastors. I've had a chance to kind of meet some of them, and almost all of them mention a course that's inside of Church Fuel called is it called Breaking 200 or Breaking the 200 Barrier? Breaking 200. Okay. So here's
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's one of the very first courses we ever released.
Okay. So I thought it was interesting that when I was talking to them, that like almost all of them mentioned that, like, oh yeah, hey, here's how I got connected with Michael and Church Fuel. Actually, I went through his Breaking 200 class, and I've always been kind of really intrigued by the 200 barrier, right? Just because I think there's I don't want to influence your answer, so I have my own thoughts on it, but I'm curious. What would you say, like, if a church is stuck trying to break through that 200 barrier, right? Maybe they're at 130, 140, 150, 175, 180, but they just can't seem to break through that 200 barrier. Just in kind of like a shortened, concise answer, what do you think would be the best way for them to break through that 200 barrier?
Yeah, so I do think a system is the thing, and where I would say to work on it is I would choose one. I'm going to broadly categorize these. I would choose one backdoor system and one front door system to work on. So a backdoor system would be something like leadership development, right? A lot of times a church, 150, right? The pastor kind of can know everybody. Like there's a law around that. It's like you can know 150 people, and it's like if somebody in the church has a problem, they call the pastor. And so one of the keys to breaking through that is having another leader. Like it literally could be one other person, and it could be paid person, full-time person, part-time person, volunteer person. It could be a handful of people that share responsibilities. But so it's a leadership structure where there's not a bottleneck of one person that has to kind of make all the decisions and do all the ministry and do all the thing. And I would say that's more like a backdoor or an internal system. And so I'd probably work on that. And then I would also work on something that's like outward facing system, like a visitor situation. Like, what is our plan to get visitors to come to the church in the next like 10 weeks or 12 weeks or fall or what spring or whatever next season, and literally make sure you have some different things happening in there. So, right, you're working on kind of the internal stuff, and I'd probably start with leadership. And then you're working on something that's external, and maybe it's Sunday related or event related or something, but just something that can like generate some momentum or some inviting that's happening. And I'd probably try to spend an equal amount of time working on those two things, standardizing and systemizing those two things, and just kind of get going that way. That's very generic advice. It's probably like you got to contextualize that and make it work for your setting. But I think that at least gets you in the right conversations.
Bro, I love it, and I love that you brought this up too, right? Like you talk about how every pastor can manage about 150 relationships, right? So that's actually called Dunbar's number.
Dunbar's number, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Dunbar's number, right? And that's I personally think this has a lot to do with why you hit that white water around there, right? Because all the way up, like, and basically Dunbar's number says that every single person can manage about 150 relationships, right? Anything more than that, and some start to fall off as you make new ones, right? So,
it goes two ways, right? So, like as that number gets bigger, the pastor starts to feel more stressed that they can't manage all the people, but the people are actually frustrated they don't have access like they used to either. So it's not good for either. It's not good at all to like be the bottleneck. You got to get some other people to go. So like when there's a pastoral need, when there's a care issue, when there's something happen, like people have got to be able to go somewhere if they can't get to you. And so it's actually, I think that's a good kind of leadership to develop other people to do that. Bro,
that's it. Man, I'm so glad you just hit on that, because that's exactly it, right? Like even I helped a church one time. We were talking about distinctives again. I used to talk about just, hey, what makes you unique and makes you different than everybody else. And that was one of the things, because I remember this pastor was a different church, but it was a denominational church. He just kept saying, man, we're not a mega church. We don't have all the lights and the fog and the smoke and all that kind of stuff, right? And he was saying that like it was a negative thing. And I was like, bro, like, do you realize that like there are tons of people out there who aren't looking for that? Like literally that stuff turns them off.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
like,
yes, right. So we literally just look, hey, what are they currently doing right now that actually could make them different? And that was one of the things where at the time, right, they're running about 100 to 120, and it was just like, oh, like, hey, if you're looking for a place, right, like if you're looking for a church where you can look the pastor in the eye and shake his hand every single week, right? Are you like, if you're looking for a church where everybody knows your name, if you're looking for a church where when you miss one Sunday or something like that, like people notice and they call and follow up to check on you, right? Like if that's the type of church you're looking for, right, consider our church. And I remember like that messaging resonated with so many people, because they're like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for, right? They didn't want to get lost in the crowd of like a larger church. But even that, right, like you said, eventually you scale to a point where you don't have the access to the pastor the way that you used to, that kind of stuff. And so so you need to start to have more people. So man, that's really interesting. Okay, so man, any parting thoughts that you have for people here who are maybe encountering systems for the very first time?
Start small, start simple. Like you could design this on a piece of a paper, on a whiteboard. Don't feel like you need to have super advanced technology or a lot of people. Like literally just start small with the area that you feel like gives you your greatest opportunity. And I mean, write things down. Don't keep it in your head. I thought that was a great word, Chris. Like don't just go, oh, this is what we do and I got it here. No, write it down so you can share it with other people and just get started. Just get started on it.
I love it. Okay. Man, so just to reiterate, y'all, man, Michael is going to be on the Grow Your Church workshop. So August 10th, we're doing a live workshop, the Grow Your Church workshop. Michael's going to be there. I'm going to be there. Ryan Wakefield's going to be there. And we have literally put together a back to school visitor plan, a step-by-step back to school visitor plan that you can use at your church. And it's specifically designed to help you bring in 10 to 15 new families this fall. Right now, you're probably going to need some systems to help keep those people around. Right. That's where Michael comes in and church fuel and stuff. But if you want to come to that, you can come to go to churchmarketinguniversity.com/abo. That's my personal invite link to you. And you can register for that Grow Your Church workshop. Michael, I was just looking at it this morning. We have over 5,000 church leaders registered for that.
That's awesome.
For that workshop already. So I think it's going to be really, really cool. And the software that we're using has limitations. It only allows a certain amount of people. I don't remember what that number is, but I know like only the first
5,001.
Yes, 5,000. That's perfect. So if you guys are interested in coming to that, it's free. You can come to the Grow Your Church workshop. Make sure you register, and then make sure you show up a few minutes early, because just in case we max out whatever that number is. Right? I think we had over 6,000 sign up for the one back in January. And we still got a couple weeks here, or about a week and a half for this one. So if you guys want to learn more about systems, you want a back to school visitor plan, and you're watching this video before August 10th, just go to churchmarketinguniversity.com/abo. You can hear more from my man, Michael Lukaszewski, and we'll give you kind of a step-by-step plan on how to reach new families this fall. So
that's awesome.
Michael, thank you so much for being on the channel, man, coming in and doing this. Man, I'm absolutely pumped, and look forward to doing this some more, man.
You bet. Love it, man. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right, y'all. Have a good one. God bless you guys. Let's go make heaven crowded. We'll see you soon.